Challenger.
Welcome, viewer. Well, this will be different video than usual. I'm hoping to explain photographic equipment with a little bit of debunking. Well, I'm jumping ahead. Let's back up a little bit. One fun fact. I'm recording this super late at night or super early. I'm stoned, drunk, insomniac, and bored. So when I slur and it gets too difficult to understand, I mean more than usual, please switch on subtitle. Almost all my video have my own custom subtitle and not the auto-generated awesomeness, which doesn't understand me half the time. Can't blame the AI though. No one understands me. Explain why I'm single at my age. So, as a glober and anti-science debunker, I often come across videos and photos by various flat earth believers. At almost in every case, the footage isn't something to write to home about, which makes any analysis on the photo much harder. In all honesty, suppose I have a view that proves flat earth. I would do my darndest to ensure I have the best photo or video I can possibly have, so there is no confusion whatsoever. I will confess at this point that I know very little about photography. It's the Dunning-Kruger effect, but hopefully I can give a basic explanation that should help, with my fingers crossed that professional photographers won't find my video too cringy. First part of the video is talking about basic photography and what is needed in my opinion for our use case. But I need something more, maybe a debunking? Well, I found a video by a flat earther who tries to prove moon isn't as far away as we think. Most of it gets explained anyway in the photography section and gives me a valid reason to call it a debunking video. That's an inside joke. Bear in mind that I started in analog era. Fortunately, though part of the technology has changed, part has remained the same, which also means what was most important when I was young is something no one cares about anymore. We're talking about film speed. In old days, we used to buy film roll. The film has special chemicals that react to normal light. If someone accidentally opened the back cover, oh dear, some photos would be lost. Being a cheap ass, I used to put the roll in complete darkness, so I could squeeze the most amount of shots out of it. Once we had finished with the roll, have it developed. It was super easy for black and white film. My dad was seriously into photography and he had his own darkroom and equipments. We would take the roll and dip it in several chemicals and then it would be called developed. Back to those rolls. The speed was specified in ISO. The higher the ISO is, the faster the film can capture light. Obviously, when you're taking pictures of fast-moving object, you want to use a faster film to take the shot quicker. Without that, the object would appear blurry. So why not use the fast film all the time? Well, the price for high speed was noise. It was grainier, and if you're printing at large size, it would become more and more apparent. The rule simply was, if you want quality, use lower speed. That was one reason for having multiple cameras with different speed film. Thanks God for digital age. Now all DSLR allows you to change the ISO on the fly. How awesome is that? Truly awesome is the answer you're looking for. What has changed? Well, instead of a film, we now have a digital sensor. Life is good. At the same time, now it's the size of the sensor that partially is responsible for the final quality. Back in my days, God, I sound old. Well, here is my second camera, which I still manage to have. Don't ask me how old this is. Well, as old as I am. This is called a SLR, which stands for Single Lens Reflex. So those days, the typical consumer camera had a viewfinder, which was really a hole with some transparent cover. As this hole was a little above the lens, what you saw is not exactly what the lens saw, which also meant if you had forgotten to remove your lens cover, you would not know and would be taking a lot of black screen. I remember many of us making that same mistake. Whereas SLR worked like a periscope. There is a mirror in this cavity and then this large mirror. So the view would be through the lens. Being a mechanical camera, this doesn't require any battery to function. It has a very basic exposure meter, and that's all the battery is used for. This is the dial for exposure speed. The fastest is 1,000th of a second, then up to 4 seconds. If you wanted it longer, we had B mode or bulb mode. Then when we press the trigger, the mirror lifts and the film is exposed to light through the lens. At this point, viewfinder would be black as the mirror has lifted up. You might be thinking, what is the point of me showing you this, apart from showing off? Well, basic understanding followed by, in those old days, the body itself didn't matter. It might have a faster shutter speed, maybe a better inbuilt exposure meter, but that is it. The meat was the lens. Well, it still is. A super expensive camera body on a bad lens would be infinitely poorer in quality compared to a basic body with a good lens. So, what is a good lens? What is important? Well, professionals, don't shoot me for my following comment. It's not the uppercase F, but the lowercase f. A little geek humor there. Let's start with the uppercase, as traditionally the first value we see in the lens. This value stands for focal length, is in millimeter. The human eye is said to see about the equivalent of 30 to 50 millimeter. A lower number would take in a bigger value than what you naturally see, and a higher number would focus on a smaller aspect of your view. In my days, 50 millimeter was considered normal. Anything less would be wide-angle lens. Anything higher would be a telelens or a telephoto lens. And no, as I mentioned, this is not a value to indicate quality. The uppercase f value is followed by our lowercase f value. Most of the time we see a value like 1: some number. In this case, it is showing us only the maximum aperture value. Now this is it. The lower that maximum value, the better and more expensive the lens is. General rule of thumb: if a same manufacturing has released two lenses with same focal but different aperture, I bet the lower maximum would be more expensive. Let's see what this does in a lens. As I move the aperture ring, you should be able to see a couple of plates moving inside to make different size hole. At minimum settings, these covers are completely out of the way. But as I increase the aperture size, we get an obstruction. With highest aperture, this is the smallest hole, or the least amount of light being passed through. But before moving to next part, let me tie up the whole f value. Ideal lens for you depends on your requirement. Earlier in my life, I was an event photographer for places like Crucible Theaters, Playhouse and such. At the event, I pretended I was playing a stealth game. I should not be seen. I should not be heard. Obviously no flash, and I had to use zoom. But at backstage or photo shoot for the promotional material, that zoom lens would do me no good. I need a wide angle lens, and I have a lot more control over light. So that requirement was good zoom, okay wide. If you're a wedding photographer, well, okay of everything would be fine. You don't really need a low maximum aperture for most shots. Finally, for flat earth or for globe earth, well, what is it we are shooting? If it is a scenery like mountains and landmark, well, nothing is moving, right? Even a couple of seconds exposure is fine. But for crying out loud, stop using video. Even at 4K video is nothing to a photo by the same device, which should be at least 3 times better? Or is it 4 times or 5? I understand at times video proves the point a lot more. Well, maybe a continuous shooting would also do the same. Nikon P1000 can do 7 frames per second. So pan slowly with continuous shooting and voila. Before anyone decides to poor shame me on my cheap lens, well, yes, I am poor. But the point of this video is explaining what everything means and when it matters. If the bloody mountain is not going to move in the next 4 seconds, guess what? I can have exposure of 1001, 1002, and so on. Do I need a telephoto of 500mm with 2.28 maximum aperture that cost £15,000? Or how about a f8 or £200? Let me see. Quick calculation. It would take me 8 times longer for exposure. Okay. Hey, mountain. Instead of holding still for 1/1000th of a second, do you mind holding still for 125th of a second? And that would save me about 14,800 pounds. Next, depth of field. Flat earther, please pay attention to this part. This is easy to understand and would help everyone. To explain it, well, suppose the lens is focused on a point n distance away. In simple terms, based on the focal length and the amount of light entering the lens, some distance before and after the point would still be in focus, or we can say sharp. Anything out of that range would be out of focus or not sharp. This range is called depth of field. Generally, in the old days, we used a coarse formula that kind of works in most cases. That is, 1/3 of this range is in front of focus and the remaining is behind. This is where I love the old lens. They showed it on the lens itself. Underneath the ring, you can see an arrow. So this is the point where the lens is currently focused. On both sides of the arrow, we see some other ticks with aperture value. This is the depth of field range. So if I'm focusing at 10 feet, an aperture of 8 would mean around 8.5 feet to 15 feet would be in focus. If I increase the aperture to 16, that range becomes 7 feet to 30 feet. So why not use a higher aperture all the time? Well, remember, this reduces the light coming in, which means it would take longer to take a photo. Sometimes you want to have a lower depth of field for artistic reason. One more thing. Suppose we have the luxury of using highest aperture. Maybe the mountain won't move and we have enough light. This is a trick I have used all the time. This is manual focus, but only once. Let me explain. If I'm taking picture of landscape and at 16 f-stop, on this 50mm, if I set my focus at 15 feet, anything from 9 feet to infinity would be in focus. This is my next tip. Real man and woman uses manual focus. Doesn't it bug you guys when the camera makes all that noise trying to keep autofocusing even when the object is very far away? You can easily solve it using the technique I just mentioned. Hell, worst case, just focus it to infinity and set it to manual. You'd get better shots. Finally, let's jump to what I know least about. Current DSLR. Don't get me wrong, everything we talked so far is valid for any cameras, from expensive to cheap tablet camera. As we have seen in earlier cameras, body meant little, as the capture was on film. But DSLR or digital single lens reflex uses a sensor inside the body, which means all of a sudden the body actually means something. There are different features, different specs, and different prices. If we compare a GoPro with a knockoff action cam, now I'm not knocking them. I have one of these cheap action cam myself. Where GoPro shines, in my opinion, is the stabilizer feature. Most cheap action cam doesn't have any. My last one didn't, and the current one does for 1080p, but not for 4K. What does that mean? Well, if I can have the action cam on a tripod, it is as good as GoPro. In fact, at times, it is better than a GoPro. How about when I'm walking with the action cam? It is horrible. I get a headache watching the footage. My point? What is the use case? If the focus is on photography, does it matter if the video is 1080p compared to 4K? Does our use case demand 120 fps or 60 fps? The key spec for a body really is the size of the sensor. Just like lens allowing light, the bigger this sensor physically is, the better it is. But it is a delicate balancing act. Larger sensor requires bigger lens to catch the image, bigger camera body to fit, and bigger price tag. That is all, in my opinion, when it comes to body. Everything else is just gravy. At this point, can I please ask everyone, don't ever use digital zoom. It is evil. In all seriousness, digital zoom is fake. It is same as expanding in any digital image software and not as good. So what really happens is, the camera starts magnifying the view from center using whatever algorithm it's using. Then that view is captured. Instead, just capture the original view. For zoom, the only thing real is optical zoom, i.e., lens with higher focal length. And please get a tripod. These are not expensive. But seriously, quite often flat earth footage is extreme zoom. Now a tiny bit of shakiness is not detectable at wide angle, but the higher the zoom is, the more prominent it becomes. I hope we all understand the math why that is the case. A tripod would make it so much better. I guess I covered almost everything. Now what if you're as poor as me? What if you cannot afford a P1000? The Nikon Coolpix P1000 Super Zoom camera has, as of July 2018, the world's longest lens, coming in at 24 to 3000mm equivalent with a maximum aperture range of f2.8 to f8. The lens features image stabilization system that reduces shake by up to 5 stops. It uses 16 megapixel 2.3-inch CMOS sensor with an ISO range of 100 to 6400. Video can be captured at Ultra HD 4K 30p and 1080p 60p with manual exposure. Yes, poor me thinks that is fancy. Sorry, I did mention I'm a cheap bastard. Time for a quick out of sequence cut, and it is a non sequitur. On a different note, recently I came across a video with the given data. This is a video that I cannot explain, and the quality I have access to is only 1080p. So any analysis I want to do is way too much prone to error. It is a video from Liverpool across Irish Sea, looking past some wind turbine to some land in the background. This place is about 2 hours drive from me, and I do want to go and get some shots myself just to verify this claim. The problem is equipments. As you can see, my DSLR is the first release of Sony's series. It was the dog's bollocks when it was launched, but nowadays, a cheap tablet can beat it in pixel count. During this pandemic, like almost everyone else, I have also been hit with furlough to eventual bankruptcy of the company. Thus, money is tight, really tight. So the question is, can I get a budget system that can take shots for our test case? That is, either prove or disprove flat globe Earth with visual claim that can stand? To start with, a body. I'm looking at Sony A58. Why Sony? Well, I want to use all my existing lens, which limits which mount I can use. It has 20 megapixel APS-C sensor with 16,000 ISO. One can pick up a second-hand one for 150 pounds with a basic lens. Oh, by the way, a P1000 is only 980 pounds with 24 to 3000 mm lens. Well, we need a high telephoto lens. Let me show you the cheap man's alternative. This beauty you see is what my dad had from 60s and gave to me. This is a telelens extender. 2 parts joined together provides 3 times the original focal, where this one part provides 2 times. But nothing in life is for free. This particular expander reduces light by half for each part. So if I want to use 2x, my exposure time would be twice than before. For 3x, it should be 4 times as much. A super cheap telephoto I could find at this point is an Optica 420-1600 for 80 pounds. Now this item is misleading from title, as in reality, it's a 210 to 800 mm with a 2x converter. Spec gives us just f8 and I assume that's for 210 mm. But it doesn't matter. The landmark and wind turbine aren't going to move. Another 2x converter is 20 pounds more. So for about 250 pounds, one can get a used A58 body with the 18 to 55 mm lens, and then with extender an 840 to 3200 mm telephoto, then add a tripod if you don't have one. Will this picture be as good as a P1000 for our use case? Yes, I believe so. This will take a lot longer. I expect maybe even 16 times as longer. That sounds a lot, right? Well, yes and no. This is my calculation when I'm high and drunk. And just for fun, I refuse to double check my estimation. So, on a mid-cast day, for the shot of those wind turbine, I would say f8 for 500th of a second, or maybe f5.6 with an ISO 100. So that is P1000. For my poor old A58, well, if I increase the ISO to 400, I did mention earlier that higher ISO is grainier, but it becomes apparent when printed on a large poster. And even at A3 print, one would be hard-pressed to tell the difference between ISO 100 and ISO 400. Or maybe just me with my bad eyesight. After ISO 400, I believe our exposure would be 1/25th of a second. Oh, please don't be wrong, don't be wrong. I'm so bloody stoned. I shouldn't be doing this now. Of course, the proof is in the pudding. Hopefully I'll be able to budget this in next couple of weeks, and the telephoto is from USA. That would take a while. Fingers crossed, maybe 3 weeks. I did mention some debunking, right? Well, get ready. Okay, please allow me to explain something we should all know, except this guy. How do we see something? Or how does the camera see something? Well, light reflects back from an object and reaches our eyes or the camera lens. When the intensity is high enough for the sensor to register, may it be a CMOS sensor or our brain, that is when we see or register that object. We see the sun, we see the stars that are millions of light years away. We can capture them using camera. So it is not really the distance that dictates what we see. I have made a detailed video explaining how our vision works. I'll put the link in description which goes more into this. So when someone makes a comment, science says it can zoom 384,400 kilometers away, what does it really mean to you? Okay, for argument's sake, let's say we're talking about some object that covers the whole sensor. So to rephrase the statement, on a P1000, if an object just filled our sensor height, when the focal length is 3000 mm, what is the distance to that object? And the answer is, drumroll, undefined. You cannot calculate the distance with given variables. So, first part of debunking, science cannot say it can zoom whatever distance away. It can zoom to sun, right? And if we're talking about it fitting the sensor, we need the object dimension. I did mention about being stoned and drunk, right? Well, that's all for this video. This is first of its kind, as I normally don't record myself when I'm in this state. I do hope you did understand me and enjoy this content. If so, please like, comment and whatnot. Also subscribe if you haven't so. I do make some interesting content once in a while. Have a safe day. I would be saying signing off, but I feel a little bit of plagiarism with a nod to Team Skeptic, cause it's super cool. I'm off!